I want to tell you a couple of stories about some people that all have something in common. And I think what you find will surprise you. If you like history, you'll want to hear this. It's fun. All right, so the first fellow, he lived in upcountry Georgia. All these stories come from the American Revolution. One day, some people kind of think calling themselves officials, they came and demanded that he, pronounce his loyalty to the powers that be. And he's like, look, I have my political ideas, you have your political ideas, this is my property, you should get off of it. And they didn't like that answer. Someone drew a gun. It might have been the property owner, but it was his property. But he was very much outnumbered, and they beat him, tied him to a tree, and tortured him. Poured like hot tar on him, burned his foot really badly. He ended up with a permanent limp. They cracked his skull too, and he ended up forming a ranger unit that became like a holy terror to his enemies. He even had a nemesis, and they kept, running up against each other. And this fellow, more often than not, ended up besting him. He formed like a friendship alliance with the man who had founded the Georgia Rangers before the war. Those were disbanded, but in a sense reestablished. Nonetheless, this man, was fighting on a side, and one day he and his men were captured. They were pinned up against a river and surrendered, and the enemy forces just murdered them. And so our hero was, I think, quite upset by that. Our hero, this fellow from North Georgia that I was speaking of, that his comrade in arms had been killed like that. Next person I would mention is a guy from South Carolina. And during the American Revolution, he picked a side that was not the same side that his father supported, but he picked it, and he ended up having a falling out with them, though, and was going to return to his home county, but got word from his former political allies that if he was seen in his home county, they would kill him. So he decided to stay away. And this political committee went to his father at one point, who was a fairly respected local man, general store owner, rather elderly, and who also had a disabled son. And they did similarly to what they did to this fellow in Georgia. They said, you need to pledge loyalty. And he's like, no, it's my property, I'm not. And they beat him and killed the disabled kid, or disabled young adult. When our fellow from South Carolina heard about that, he returned to the county, walked straight into the home of the leader of this kind of mob or group, and shot him in the chest on the spot. He then goes on to form his own sort of guerrilla group that just terrorizes upcountry South Carolina. They call out a general to catch him, to try to get him. And the next person I would mention is in New Jersey. A similar situation. He was a farmer and minded his own business. He was a little political. He had opinions, but wasn't really involved in any organizations or anything. Well, one fine day he was walking in the fields with one of his neighbors that he got along with, and he saw these riders coming up. He recognized them and thought, they're probably here to try to extract some loyalty oath, so let me just kind of run on away. I don't want them catching up with me. And then they started shooting at him when he started running away. He eventually got behind friendly military lines, joined the military as something of an irregular for a while, and was incredibly successful as an infiltrator. He could get behind enemy lines and captured the mail of enemy generals. He also was able to get behind enemy lines and liberate prisoners. This is a pretty interesting fellow. And so, what these men have in common is they were all loyalists. So, the first fellow, the fellow in Georgia, his name was Thomas Brown, nicknamed Burnfoot Brown because having been tortured and having had his foot burned. And he led, I think first they were called the Florida Rangers and then renamed the Carolina Rangers, but it was a sort of multi-ethnic force. It was Native Americans, loyalists who had been largely of British descent, and I think some freed slaves as well. And the other fellow, the one from South Carolina, was Bill Cunningham, nicknamed Bloody Bill Cunningham. Now, his actions were a little bit more in line with just brutal guerrilla warfare to the point of murder. The third fellow that I specifically was speaking of was James Moody from New Jersey. Now, he ends up going to Canada. Brown ends up in the Caribbean. Cunningham ended up in the Caribbean too. So after the war, a lot of the loyalists, they either got land in the Caribbean or Canada, and some went to England. And one of the points I kind of am getting at is English-speaking Canada was largely founded by our American loyalists. And if you look at the cultural differences, you can kind of see that. Those were the government in place is set up around those who thought the revolution was perhaps ill-advised for whatever reason. Now, you can look at their writings. James Moody, he wrote like a little autobiography, which I highly suggest looking him up and reading. It's not that incredibly long, and it's fascinating. And it shows just how brutal the war was in that area. And he basically was saying this whole live free or die thing. It wasn't like live free or the British will kill you. It was live free or we're going to kill you. And it's like join or die. Like it was a threat. It wasn't an inspirational quote. And he's like, I'm not inclined to either. And he's like, I have a wonderful farm. We have he wrote about the Constitution a lot. And so does another fellow, James Chalmers, who I'll mention in a second. So he writes about the Constitution and wanting to protect the Constitution. Moody was kind of like, look, we've got a good government. We have freedom of speech. We have freedom of assembly. Like this, you had the whole Boston Massacre, but as soon as the U.S. government came to power, they instituted similar laws, the ability to disperse crowds. That's just part of having a government. Is if a mob forms, people should have the authorities have the right to say, hey guys, you need to move along before somebody gets hurt. All right, so Moody saw the Americans as being basically a mob that was ignoring the Constitution, ignoring the rule of law, and he's like, I have no idea what these guys are really going to replace it with. You got to remember, this is way before the U.S. Constitution. The U.S. Constitution wasn't written until after the Revolutionary War. So it's like, I don't know. We're wealthy, we're happy. I've got a nice farm. We have freedom. We have a long tradition. Why are these people trying to kill me and everyone else? What's going on? And Thomas Brown was fairly similar. I have not found any of his political writings, what he has to say. And Bill Cunningham had initially been on the American side. The only reason he joined the Loyalists is the Americans killed his family. So there's a lot of just terror that was happening early on. And you can see even in Canadian society now how everything is based on civility and politeness, which I think might come from the people that founded it. In an alternate universe, Thomas Brown would be held in high regard, much like Francis Marion or something. And we do see that sort of thing in Canada. The Simcoe Rangers, these were loyalist rangers in New York. And there's Simcoe Rangers still exist in Canada. So here's this loyalist unit from the Revolutionary War that still exists. So we get to see that alternate universe. delving a little bit more into politics and reasoning, James Chalmers, he was a loyalist from Maryland. And he wrote a pamphlet. It was an answer to common sense, and it's called Plain Truth. And he basically is saying, look, we have balance of powers. We have, a constitutional government. And we've already had our Civil War about, the English Civil War about the power of the crown versus the power of the people, and, the Parliament and representatives win. If you guys go toward more democracy, it's probably going to end badly. And he referenced the Roman Republic and the Greeks, and say these groups get idealistic. Democracies and republics get idealistic, and they get expansionist. Whereas Thomas Paine said, like, the kings send you off to war for their own profit. Chalmers is like, look, if you guys become a republic, you're going to invade your neighbors. Like, you will. That's what will happen. And it did. I mean, he was right. That's exactly what happened. The U.S. started invading its neighbors to expand because of manifest destiny. He kind of called that. He's like, we've seen it in history before. It'll happen again. And similar to Moody, he's like, we have a constitution. We should have rule of law. We're quite happy. And both of them admit that, well, the Americans might have some justifiable complaints, but the reaction seems to be excessive. And you can see that attitude in Canadians today. They're very calm and rational. And one of the things I would like to point out to you is, if you're saying, I want to move to Canada. We should, our state should become a Canadian province. In a way, you're saying that the Loyalists were right. That's indirectly what you were saying, because Canada, it's hard to know exactly what would have happened had the Redcoats won. But the government would probably be a little closer to the way that the government of Canada is organized. I imagine we would have something closer to a parliamentary system. Who knows exactly. I think I might do a video on Colonel Ty, who was an escaped slave who joined Loyalist forces. Pretty interesting character. And Augusta Bowles, who was also fascinating. He was a Maryland Loyalist that ended up becoming like a Creek or a Muskogee king of sorts in Florida. He tried to create a Native American pirate kingdom. And that's a pretty interesting story, too.